Good afternoon, everyone. We will continue with the agenda item 6. And I will continue with the list. And on my list we have EU first. EU, you can have the floor.
Yes, okay, I believe the TEEP members are seated because we have a couple of questions for them, and also we have some comments, clarifications on the overall report to make. So let's start with a question for the H-Talk on halons. On the 26% emissions factor, that seems to fit well the observations. So what explanation can you give us, what speculation how such a high emission factor is possible? That would be, because it's much higher of course than usual and what we have for other feedstock sources, how could that, if that is actually all coming from feedstocks, what could explain such a high factor? For the MB talk on methyl bromide, we mentioned that there is the talk mentions that there is a gap between production and consumption for QPS. So what is needed for the MB talk in order to better understand this issue and to make the numbers line up? On foams, on the alternatives, we would like to mention that there is in the Netherlands, in the EU, a process where old foams are recovered and the ODS and HFCs destroyed therein, and then the foam matrix is reused to make new foam. We just wondered if the TEEP was aware of this new. Otherwise, we'd be happy to provide this information. For the RTOC, we have a question. There are standards that recently have been updated, IEC 60335-289 and 241 in the area of commercial refrigeration, one in the area of air conditioning. And we would like to know how these standards, in your view, will affect the introduction of flammable refrigerants, in particular A3 refrigerants in commercial refrigeration and in air conditioning, and what that means for the use of these substances in the future. So a final question, this is more an overall question on the issue of TFA and PFAS. If the TEEP is aware of the recent proposal to regulate TFA by ECHA due to the proposal to ECHA due to reproductive toxicity effects and the underlying studies for that. And a bit linked to this issue, we also have some clarifications to make for the benefit of the parties, and we're happy, of course, for the TEEP to react on the issue of PFAS as dealt with in the report. First of all, we want to remind that a basic principle for environmental law in the EU is the precautionary principles. And when this Vienna Convention and the protocol was started in the 1980s, there was not full certainty on the effects and processes in the atmosphere. And even though there wasn't this certainty, people started to act, and we are much the better today because they did act at a point in time when the science was not fully clear. So the same precaution is something that is being applied to the PFAS issue. We know that the whole family of PFAS is very persistent. It's very difficult to get them out of the environment once they're there. Of course, it's a large group of substances, some of which have been shown clearly to have toxic effects, carcinogenic effects. On TFA, there's a lot of science still going on, a lot of studies coming up showing high levels in drinking water. I mentioned the reproductive toxicity effects, but this is still certainly a matter of study, and it is a bit the precautionary principle that we should be cautious once these things are being looked at from the science point of view, how relevant they are for health. So uncertainty was mentioned a lot in the report, and that the legislation is creating uncertainty. It's the other way around. There's a public worry on this issue, on the forever chemicals, and the health effects they may have, and that some industry players are deciding not to pursue it is because of these worries. And the regulatory approach is actually to create the certainty for the people on health effects and for industry on what alternatives to use. It's not that the regulatory process is creating an uncertainty. It's trying to take it away. It's trying to make certainty. A little bit on the legislative process, and it is a very complex issue. It's a large group of substances, and we need the right information. As you've mentioned in your presentation, the process, when we're speaking for the EU, is underway. There is a proposal that has been made, and an extensive stakeholder consultation was held. It had 5,600 comments from industry and others, from 4,400 stakeholders. And this information is available on the European Chemical Agency website, unless it's labeled confidential, so that can be looked up. At the moment, the Committee of Risk Assessment and the Committee of Socio-Economic Analysis is evaluating these proposals in batches on a sectoral level. It's an independent scientific evaluation. It's a series of meetings. At the end, you will have an opinion, and that will then be the basis for policymakers to make a final restriction. So there's no restriction out there. It's under process. It's a huge stakeholder consultation. It's a comprehensive process with a due diligence, and exactly to see where PFAS will still be essential for society. So nothing is a foregone conclusion at this moment in time. And the final outcome, if there is a restriction on the PFAS, may look very different from what it is today. So on the issue of the exemptions, you have mentioned also that in the proposal there are some areas that are already exempted with 6.5 and 13.5 years. That is in the case, for instance, of fire suppressing agency for aviation, industrial precision cleaning fluids, for some aerosols, and foams. So there are some exemptions foreseen, and given that huge effort to collect more information, there may be more exemptions at the end of the day based on essential use. So if there is a restriction proposal, it will very likely come with these essential use exemptions, and that should cover any essential sectors where alternatives are available. So the whole data collection exercise serves the function to see where such exemptions are necessary. So that as a bit of a clarification of how this is being dealt with in the EU. Maybe just to conclude, two things that we have picked up in the report and we don't necessarily agree is one that delaying the HFC phase-out because of the PFAS issue. Well, in the EU, we are already at 45% of our Montreal Protocol obligations, so we're 55% better than what we need to do. And we have significantly reinforced our current rules, and we can do that with the suitable alternatives available, many of which are not PFAS. And smaller equipment, both in refrigeration and air conditioning, are moving to alternatives that are not PFAS. Similarly, there was a statement of slowing the rollout of heat pumps. That also seems incorrect. We're very interested in Europe in bringing heat pumps to the market and not prevent them from being so. And what we see is happening is the opposite, that they're coming to a market, and the restrictions put on these with regard to high global warming refrigerants is actually spurring development, innovation, and we've seen, for instance, when we look at the monoblocks, small monoblocks, that all the companies are now offering them with propane, which was not the case just a very short while ago. So just to conclude here, on the PFAS issue, the regulatory wants to provide clarity for industry and for the citizen, and certainly because this is an issue linked to health and environmental health. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Where we are.
Very
much,
والشكر
Madam
موصول للأمانة
Co-Chair. Thank you
وفريق
to the Secretary
التقييم التقني والاقتصادي.
team.
بداية
To
نحن
begin
نؤيد
with,
جميع تساؤلات الأشقاء في دولتين الكويت والبحرين الشقيقة وأود طرح تساؤلات
and I do
حول
have some questions
سيانيد الهيدروجين كبديل لبروميد الميثيل
hydrogen
فهو
cyanide
كما
as
لا
a
يخفى على
replacement for
الجميع
methyl
شديد
bromide. As you know, it
السمية
is
واستخدم
very
في بعض
highly
الحروب
toxic and it was
سلاحا
used
كيميائيا
as a chemical
فكيف
weapon in some
أن
wars. So
يوصي به
how
التقرير
could the report
باستخدامه مادة
recommend to
لمعالجة
use
ما
it
قبل الشحن
as a
والتخزين؟
substance to
هذا هو
deal with the
التساؤل الأول.
QPS? So that's
أما
one
التساؤل
question.
الثاني
The second
فلعل
question,
اللجنة الكيميائية
perhaps the
والطبية
chemical
مشكورة
and medical
تتبنى
community
فكرة
will
المحافظة على
adopt the
البخاخات
idea of maintaining
بخاخات
the
الأدوية
sprays,
وبالذات أدوية
medicinal
الأمراض
sprays,
الصدرية
especially when it comes to
بحماية
treating
حياة
chest
الناس
diseases for the sake of
حتى
protecting
الوصول
human
إلى
life
بدائل
until such time when we
ذات
reach
جدوى
safe
اقتصادية
alternatives that
مقبولة
are
وأسعار في
economically
متناول
acceptable and
فقراء المجتمع
affordable
العالمي
by
وليس
the
أغنياء
poor
المجتمع
people,
العالمي
not by the
حتى
rich
وجود هذه
only,
البدائل
until
يمكن أن
such
نوصي
substitutes are
باستبدال هذه
available
الغازات
or until such
البخاخة
alternatives are
في
available.
الأدوية
At
للحفاظ
such
على
time
صحة
we
العالم
can
ونحن
replace these
ننادي
gases for
جميعا
the sake of the
بلا
health of the
منازع
world.
بأن
We
للإنسان
ask
حق في
everybody
حياته
to
فينبغي أن
guard
ندفع
the right of
بالحفاظ على
human
هذه
life
الحياة.
and to protect human life.
أما التساؤل الثالث
As for
فهو
the
حول
next question,
الهالون
it has to do
1301
with 1301
أتوقع
halons.
أن الاقتراح
I
الأجدى
believe that the best proposition is to encourage
إجراءات السلامة
countries to
بالتعامل مع
be
هذا
strict
الهالون
with the safety measures when it comes to dealing with this halon, which is the effective material in fighting fires in aviation, and to keep it through recycling in order to maintain the global reserve until such time when you have safe alternatives that could be used in the aviation.
والحرص على إجراءات السلامة في جميع توصياتنا لأني مع الأسف الشديد لم أسمع
because unfortunately I have not seen in any of the reports, I have seen any documents
سواء سلامة الأفراد أو سلامة العاملين والمتعاملين مع هذه المواد والمواد الكيميائية كما لا يخفى على الجميع. نحن نتعايش معها في حياتنا منذ أن نولد إلى أن نتوفى ونحن نتعامل ونتعايش معها في شربنا وأكلنا ولباسنا فهي الدواء وهي سلاح الموت. هذا وصلى الله وسلم على محمد.
The killing agent at the same time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Argentina.
En primer lugar, nos gustaría agradecer el trabajo de actualización realizado por el TIP y el esfuerzo de todos los paneles en este sentido. En nombre de esta delegación queremos traer nuevamente el tema de los HFO en el uso específicamente de espumas. Vemos con mucha preocupación que el documento del TIP se expresa una normalización de los productores de HFO, lo cual nos resulta sumamente llamativo. De hecho, en la última reunión del Comité Ejecutivo, nuestra delegación presentó un CRP que fue, de hecho, adoptado en una decisión del Comité para conocer más sobre la disponibilidad y los planes de inversión de parte de las empresas. En ese trabajo, nuestro país, junto a otras delegaciones de Latinoamérica, preparó un documento que fue presentado también para la reunión anterior del EXCOM, y de hecho, dando seguimiento a esa reunión, hemos tomado nuevamente contacto con todos los fabricantes de HFO y uno de los tres fabricantes de hecho ha expresado que para la región de Latinoamérica no tiene posibilidad de abastecer en ningún sentido hasta mínimo dentro de 18 meses. Esto obviamente puede confirmarlo el TIP hablando con los productores. También se mencionó que las alternativas estaban disponibles. Bueno, llamativamente el precio al que ofrecen los productos estos fabricantes de HFO, luego de la reunión del EXCOM, bajó a la mitad del precio, supuestamente porque todavía no lo hemos podido corroborar, pero también nos encontramos con que en el informe se mencionan, digamos, el uso de otras alternativas, que ciertamente cuando elaboramos el informe presentado a la última reunión del EXCOM, nos encontramos con que de hecho esos países que se utilizan como ejemplo, si bien están utilizando sustancias alternativas como el metilal y el formato de metilo, no lo están utilizando como una sustancia definitiva, sino como una cuestión transicional hasta que el precio de los HFO baje. En ese sentido, nos gustaría saber de dónde sacaron la información y si estuvieron en contacto con los tres productores de HFO y cuáles son los planes que ellos les han planteado de abastecimiento para Latinoamérica, a ver si corroboramos o no esta información que tenemos. En segundo lugar, tenemos el comentario dentro del informe, o el planteo dentro del informe, de que se están probando hidrocarburos para spray. Nos resulta también sumamente llamativo y queremos entender concretamente qué casos hay de testeos de hidrocarburos en spray y específicamente en qué aplicaciones de spray, porque quizás estamos hablando de otra cosa, dado que si no estamos tratando de eliminar una sustancia porque afecta el ambiente, pero estamos incorporando material inflamable en la espalda de trabajadores. Así que en ese punto nos gustaría saber más acerca de esas pruebas que se están haciendo con hidrocarburos en spray para aislación. Además, también seguimos escuchando el tema de los PFA, el riesgo de los PFA, las incertidumbres en relación a los PFA, y nos gustaría en ese sentido compartir las opiniones vertidas por Kuwait y Bahrein, posiciones que ya también hemos expresado en este mismo documento que fuera presentado al Comité Ejecutivo. Realmente nos parece llamativo que esta sea la cuarta reunión en la que estamos hablando de PFAs entre open-endeds o reuniones del grupo de composición abierta y reuniones de las partes, y seguimos con la misma incertidumbre, a la vez que otras delegaciones mencionan el principio precautorio o cuestiones de incertidumbre a partir de la definición de legislación. Por nuestra parte entendemos perfectamente y está retratado en nuestra Ley General del Ambiente el principio precautorio, pero ciertamente o hay una diferencia en el entendimiento de eso, o en realidad hay una diferencia en la concepción del problema. Nuestro punto en este sentido no es que no se pueda aplicar el principio precautorio o que no se puedan eliminar algunas sustancias. Nuestra pregunta es, concretamente, si el TIP ha estudiado cuáles son las alternativas para los gases que se prohibirían en el caso de ser precursores de PFA, determinados HFO o HFCs. En nuestra opinión, no están esas alternativas, por lo cual nos gustaría entender en ese sentido el impacto concreto, no la duda o la preocupación o la incertidumbre, sino la certidumbre de cuáles son las alternativas. Dado que venimos ya, como decía, en la cuarta reunión en ese sentido, nuestra delegación está considerando la presentación de un CRP para analizar puntualmente cuáles son, dentro de esas 10.000 sustancias que se están considerando, las que podrían afectar a las que están controladas por el protocolo de Montreal, y cuáles son las alternativas ciertas para los usos concretos, porque después también escuchamos que hablamos de hidrocarburos cuando hablamos de cosas que no pueden ser hidrocarburos, o hablamos de alternativas como agua o como otras sustancias, cuando se considera, por ejemplo, la pérdida de eficiencia energética o la aislación. Entonces, hablar en general es muy fácil, lo que queremos es certidumbre con respecto a los casos concretos, y nos gustaría saber si el TIP ha hecho algún tipo de comparación concreta, sustancia por sustancia. Muchas gracias. 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 Muchas gracias.
Thank the
TEEP and the technical option committees for the presentation. We would like to seek the following clarification. First, from the FTOC, we need clarification on use of 152A along with applications in the foam sector in Article 5 countries. Secondly, we would like to understand the penetration of HFOs in Article 5 countries and the likely growth in foam sector. We would like to understand more on the challenges relating to use of HF hydrocarbons in the spray foam sector, both in terms of performance as well as safety aspects. From the Halon Technical Option Committees, we would like to understand on the performance efficiencies on the use of reclaimed HFC 227EA. Secondly, can we have more understanding on the modeling exercise done for arriving at the Halon 1301 emissions? From the RTOC, we would like to have more information on the penetration of low GWP alternatives in Article 5 countries, which the RTOC said that the availability continues to grow. We also would like to understand more on the 18 new blends in RACHP sector and their application, and can the RTOC also give clarity in terms of standards available for these blends? We will come back on other general issues. Thank you.
Dates. For the TEEP, and we do want to thank them very much for the dedication in pulling together the report and their time this morning as well as this afternoon in answering questions from the parties. Some of these questions I'll be brief because some I have heard other delegates go different. Given the discussion that we heard on the change in the emissions factors from the MC talk, that could be part of the reason why we're seeing a higher level of emissions potentially from feedstock. We'd like some clarification around that. Was there any retrospective look using those emissions factors, or are they using it for the data they provided and going forward? And then maybe in consideration of the halon emissions that we understand, if we understand correctly, the FS talk found that if they were to use 26% as the emissions factor, then the number aligned with the number from the SAP. We would like some clarity on if that's right, because our question really is it actually that the emissions are 26%, or is it in order to make the math work, they had to use 26% as the number? We'd like a little clarity to better understand that. I know there was a similar question earlier, so I just wanted to provide that slight difference in how we were framing the question. We heard from the RTOC on a number of alternatives. There were two uses where we'd like to see if the RTOC could provide additional information. One was with regards to electric vehicles, and if we understood correctly the information the RTOC provided, it seemed to maybe make a distinction between what we think of generally as motor vehicle air conditioning and cooling for electric vehicle batteries. We'd like to first make sure our understanding is correct, and if so, could the TEEP provide additional information on the status of transition for cooling for electric vehicle batteries in particular? It sounded like that was the area for which maybe there was more of a question. We're not sure if we understood that correctly. The other for the RTOC as well is with regards to transport refrigeration, which we typically think of that as sort of having a couple different ways in which goods are transported, and we saw the information on marine having an alternative. With regards to transport refrigeration more generally, we saw an indication that 404A is being replaced by R452A, which we believe has a global warming potential of give or take around 2,500. So we're curious about whether or not there's additional work that the team may be able to provide, or any updates on other work in terms of lower GWP alternatives. And then with regards to the McTalk or MC talk, there were a couple points on the slides about MDIs where I think we just would like to have some clarification if possible. There was a statement, I think, on the slide that said we may not see alternatives for immediate dose inhalers until 2026. The wording on that slide maybe was a little confusing to us. We wonder if the team could maybe help us clarify. We were wondering if perhaps that was more, you don't anticipate any sooner than 2026? It wasn't clear to us if you meant no later than or no sooner than 2026 for alternatives to immediate dose inhalers. So that was one clarification. There was a second point that we saw in relationship, I think it was in a later slide that may have been more on PFAS, but was talking about its effect on the HFC phase down, and in particular with regards to MDIs. And we just would, again, it may be just the wording on the slide as opposed to the longer discussion that's in the report, but we thought the slide, the takeaway message might have suggested that various regulations might be putting pressure on MDIs explicitly, and we want to make sure, and we heard a couple interventions already in this session that do sort of respond to the need to ensure that there are alternatives that are appropriate for this sector before there's a transition. So again, if you could provide some clarity around, maybe we're not sure if we saw the slide quickly and didn't quite get it, or whether or not maybe there's a better way of stating what the intention was, but we understand the point that the phase down itself is going to have an effect on all markets, and obviously other regulatory actions will have an effect, but we wanted to make sure that there wasn't some sort of specific reason why MDIs might have been called out in that context. Thanks very much. Very much. Very much. Very much. Very much. Very much.
To respond to these questions, Chip, you have the floor.
First. The first question we had was from the EU as to why the production was greater than consumption over a period. I think it was from 2015 to 2022. We had about 600 tonnes a year extra of production versus consumption. TEEP's probably not in the best position to answer that from the point of view of statistics, because we don't gather those. We just use the data reported to the Ozone Secretariat. However, we are aware of that consumption is made up of production plus imports minus exports, and it's always hard to monitor imports and the exports, but it seems like it might be easy to measure production. We do know of a situation where trade import data is at least 25% greater than the government reported data. We also know of countries where there's methyl bromide brought in by one country, distributes to another, but the other country does not report. And so it's really up to the parties to report those issues better and have processes in place to get those recorded, not us. The second question was from Saudi Arabia about HCN, which is a very toxic product for humans. Yes, it is. HCN's been traditionally used for over a couple of hundred years as a product. It's actually natural, it's occurring, comes from fires and plants. But at very, very low levels, the companies that register these products make sure that they've got safety, that they've got training, they've got protective equipment so that they can be used safely. And HCN is generally used for structures that are empty. You never have people anywhere near these fumigants. In fact, most of the fumigants, you never have people around them. And we don't assess their applicability. That's done by the health and safety agencies of the various countries and the environmental agencies. And if they're registered and they're effective, that's what we look at from recommendations by us. So I hope that answers the question, but the companies now are developing new, much safer application technologies for these chemicals that are nasty and for humans, and hopefully they can be adopted safely. So if there's anything further, Saudi Arabia, that you'd like, we can talk to you bilaterally. With that, hand over to the next member. Thank you.
Right, so there was a question from the distinguished delegate from Kuwait that I failed to answer in the morning in the previous session, which is the regulation in the EU and US about GWP of 700 GWP, and these are actually for both domestic and export. So this is national regulation, but it applies for both. In terms of response to the distinguished delegate from the EU, the new standards would allow for larger flammable refrigerant charge. These apply for equally for A2L and hydrocarbons, although they allow for larger charges for A2L refrigerants, and would expand the use of flammable refrigerants in RECHP applications. We have to be careful because these standards are not yet applicable. They are going to get in force in the near future and will be assessed in the 2026 assessment report. For the distinguished delegate from Argentina, in terms of the refrigerant performance, I know the question is split mostly towards the PFAS, but there is a quick answer that I would like to suggest in terms of the refrigerant performance related to the thermal performance and energy efficient performance, and we have published many of these in the Energy Efficiency Task Force reports. Also, there are several resources available from the AHRI public website, and also there were several U.S. Department of Energy published work on this. For the distinguished delegate from India, regarding the information on low GWP alternative in Article 5 parties, we believe that hydrocarbons are generally widely adopted in residential refrigerators and self-contained commercial refrigeration in some countries or some parties, and that with the new standards being on the market, there will be expansion towards the lower end or smaller end of the air conditioning applications. In terms of the refrigerant blends, in section 6.2.2, we have listed all 18 new refrigerant blends. Also, other refrigerant blends were listed in the 2022 assessment report, so all the blending composition are available along with the global warming potential, ODP, and other pertinent information. In terms of standards, the same standards that apply for single component refrigerants apply for the refrigerant blends. Nothing new applies. For the distinguished delegate from the United States, when we talked about the electric vehicle, we wanted to, rather than just consider mobile air conditioning using the standard refrigerant, which is HFO1234YF, look into synergy opportunity by considering all thermal management opportunities, including electric battery cooling or cooling for electric batteries, and also mobile air conditioning. And that is why this synergy is creating this new concept for the chapter, which is what we call the electric vehicle thermal management. With transport refrigeration, while the industry has moved to R452A, still a relatively higher GWP alternative, additional work is being done on R744 or carbon dioxide and hydrocarbon 290. This is not widely adopted, but work is in progress. Thank you.
Is the microphone not work? Technicians, could you please
I will accumulate a number of the questions that were raised on PFAS, having consulted with some of the members of the TEEP, although I think that there might have been one question that perhaps the Fire Suppression Technical Options Committee might want to respond to. But okay, so firstly, we heard from there were questions raised by the EC, and there are a number of comments. So obviously, we'll just take the questions. The question was asked: is TEEP aware of the reproductive toxicity studies on TFA and proposals in the EU around that? And yes, we are aware of those proposals and studies, and we're keeping a watching brief on those. We would also kind of perhaps in response to some of the other questions that were raised, in relation to some of the policy developments in this area, policymakers in a number of jurisdictions are still considering their PFAS policies, and many decisions haven't yet been made in the regulatory environment, and so the final outcome of these is yet to be decided. So kind of, I guess, turning to the questions from Argentina and Kuwait and Bahrain about uncertainties. Yes, there are uncertainties in the regulatory environment, but what we can say is, because things haven't been decided, but what we can say is that a number of companies that we're aware of through the TEEP, and this is in our role in forming parties, we wanted to let you know that a number of companies are already indicating that there have been delays in decision making as a result of some of these policy developments, because they're waiting to see what will happen, and they don't want to make investments without that regulatory certainty. So we will continue to review the situation and update parties as necessary. There was also from Argentina a question about, are we aware, it was about precursors to trifluoroacetic acid and their salts, and I refer the distinguished delegate from Argentina to the Environmental Effects Assessment Panel report from 2022, which lists the precursors to TFA. Then from the United States, I'll turn now to some questions related to MC-TOC or MAC-TOC, as some people like to say. One of the questions related to the change in emission factors that we've reviewed over the last couple of years, and whether we've taken a retrospective look at emissions as a result of that change in emission factors. No, we didn't go back and do a kind of retrospective trends analysis of emissions based on those new emission factors. We're just using those moving forwards. And I think the other part of that question related to, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, whether the increased emission factors were somehow related to the higher emissions that are being, or are related to higher emissions from feedstocks. I guess in terms of the calculated modelling, yes, the higher emission factors will, by their very nature, lead to higher emissions from feedstock users because we're using a higher emission factor. But, you know, in our report on agenda item 3, we kind of compared those feedstock emissions for the substances that we could, and compared those against actual emissions in the atmosphere. And I don't know if I'm answering that question correctly. So I'll move along. Also, you asked whether the MC-TOC could clarify one of the slides where we said the first lower GWP MDIs may not reach the market until 2026. To clarify that language, it would, you know, the implication is no earlier than 2026, although three companies, I think, have said that their registered clinical studies for 3 inhalers are due to complete in 2025. So we've made our best estimate that they may not reach the market, and the may, because there's some uncertainty there, no earlier than 2026, because there are regulatory processes to go through. And even then, they will be entering the market slowly because of, you know, the need to ramp up production, and we're only talking about a small number of inhalers at this stage anyway. So it's not like, you know, come 2026, we'll be transitioning millions of, I think it's 800 million inhalers over to lower GWP MDIs. That will take a much longer time. Oh, yes, the other question related to why MDIs were called out in that PFAS slide. Let me go there. I've got to find it, sorry. There. It was purely as an example, but I guess it was an example that we wanted to highlight because in the ECHA proposal, and it's not completed, as the distinguished delegate from the EU commented, but in the current proposal, the restrictions are proposed to apply to MDIs 18 months after entry into force of any final law in that current proposal. But obviously things have not been finalised there. We were just pointing out that that was within the proposal. And as the delegate from the EC said, there are a number of other products that have derogations for you know, a delay in those restrictions coming into force for some other products. Okay, I think that's, unless someone tells me I didn't. Thank you. 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 Thank you.
Are you done with the answers?
On behalf of the fire suppression TOC, I think we had questions from 4 parties not in this order necessarily, European Union, USA, India and Saudi Arabia. So there were several questions around this 26% emission factor, which you rightly picked up on is much higher than the MCTOC normal estimates of emission factors. So to answer the kind of semi-humorous comment from USA, yes, we did that and we adjusted it until the math matched. So that gets us, is it 26%? How do we get there? The question from the European Union. Well, it's the total emission across the life cycle of the Halon 1301 manufactured, transported and used as a feedstock. So you might estimate a few percent, let's call it 5 for the manufacturing part, which is not implausible, I think. You may get some losses on transport or just the logistics of getting the material in and out of from the two plants. And then the important one is the yield. That is how much of the Halon 1301 is actually converted into the fipronil or the mefloquine or the DPP4 inhibitor. And I've seen numbers ranging in the 75 to 80% there. So 100 minus 80 is 20. 25, 26%. So it's not implausible, that number, but we're not sure about that, and that is where we would dearly love more information to sharpen up that number and get a better feel for it. There was a question, I think, from the USA on have we got more data, more historical data? No, but we would like that because, well, again, it would give us a better feeling on how to look and examine the data. And by the way, this emissions now from the feedstock production, if you were closely looking at the graph that I presented earlier, or it's in the annex of the report, the emissions now from this feedstock production, transport and use are about 1/3, más o menos, of the total global emissions. So it's 1/3 of everything, and the other 2/3 is from the fire suppression bank as modelled by the FSTOC. So, and as that number goes down and these emission bulges from the production, we think, for feedstock are the same or possibly increasing, it becomes ever more of the emissions part of the puzzle. So we think there's some more work to do here, and I think it's going to be important to minimising emissions of 1301 globally. I think that's it on the emission factor piece. There was another question, somewhat different, a question from the European Union. Were we aware of the 12 years plus 18 months derogation for certain potentially critical applications like aviation fire suppression was mentioned? We are aware, but the fire protection on aircraft is difficult. It's challenging and you have to get it right. Of the potential candidate agents, many are not efficient enough to be used on aircraft, and the remaining candidates are largely included in the PFAS group of chemicals. So, as we discussed within our committee, the cupboard is bare. So maybe the 13.5 year derogation period, welcome though it is just not long enough. Moving on to the question from India, the performance efficiency of 227A versus the reclaimed 227A. It's identical, and the reason for that is that we're talking about not recovered or recycled, but reclaimed 227A, and in our world, reclaimed means returned to the original specification. So if it's returned to the original specification, it's not really a surprise that it's exactly as good as the virgin newly produced material. The other question from India is complex. In the interest of time, I'm not going to try and explain how the FSTOC model works. I suggest we pick that up as a bilateral, and my colleague and I will gladly go through that in as much detail as the delegate needs to hear. Finally, coming on to the questions or comments from Saudi Arabia. The first piece about conserving halon, extending the longevity of the global halon banks for as long as possible, not destroying it. We completely agree with Saudi Arabia. They were very, very well made points. Thank you. The second piece, safety and security. We might not use those terms exactly in our report, but we do talk about the other performance factors. You've got the fire suppression performance, the space and weight claims, and above all, toxicity. And these, I think, are the safety and security aspects that the delegate was referring to. And these are, again, one of the reasons why replacing halon, particularly in aircraft fire applications, is just so hard. And I think I've made my points. Thank you very much for your attention.
If you could on the microphone for chip members, IP members, IP members, IP members, IP members, IP members.
I start with EU saying if TIP is aware about technologies that are used to recover and destroy ODSs and other technologies, the answer is yes. FTOC is monitoring a number of shredders that are installed globally, and unfortunately we see that are not too many installed, but yes, we know. The other point is ways to recycle foams via chemolysis that can turn to a new polyol and go into a circular economy. Yes, this technology is available and every party can apply. And the third point that we are monitoring is how foams in the end of life of buildings can be put in a circular economy. There are only few cases where they are used to produce new blocks and produce roofs and panels to be reutilized. So this is the point. Then I move to Argentina, basically separating in 2 or 3 points. The first one is availability of HCFOs and HFO. Based on our understanding, material is available. We, based on our knowledge, companies that are producing HCFOs are keen to supply the market. They have 5 plants, or better, 6 plants up running, and if you see in their sites, they are saying material available globally. Of course, you may have discussed with one company that still have a plan that is not ready yet, so they work in a system like take or pay because their availability is very limited. So this is the point related to availability. The second point is related to formulations. I would like to comment that in the last 2 years we had a great development in science of formulations, where we have new additives, meaning surfactants and catalysts that can be used to have a quite stable formulations that we can implement. And then the other point that we can do or study with HFOs is to use first higher level of water in these formulations, lower level of HFOs, and combinations of other blowing agents that can be used up to a certain level to keep formulations non-flammable to have a competitive prices. This is much more related to science of formulations, but we've seen quite I would say a big number of formulations being used all over the world with HFOs. The other point that I want to touch is water-blown formulations, which are very safe and can be competitive, have also been tremendously developed and can be the first option when we start seeking for new reagents or to replace either CFCs or HFCs. So water-blown should be considered up front. This is one point. The other, now I would like to comment, is related to hydrocarbon formulations. The comment made by FTalk in the presentation is to alert parties that to use hydrocarbons spray could be a serious risk, and this should be monitored, and that's why we put this in this presentation. On the contrary, we are not fomenting this utilization. So I think I took all points Argentina comment related to PFAS. Developing countries are not implementing rules to ban F-gases, so I think developing countries or A5 parties still have some time to work with the HFOs. Thank you.
I'd like to give the floor to Brazil.
First of all, we would like to thank in all of our questions. We fully support the comments made by Argentina in relation to HFOs. It is extremely important that the technical committees take into account regional circumstances, and we highlight that the decision adopted in the previous ExCon meeting that it is proof of the difficulties taking place in our region in relation to alternatives to PU form. To the MB talk and the alternatives for methyl bromide for QPS uses, we wanted to make sure that in addition to technical aspects, regional availability and logistical difficulties were also considered. For instance, in some countries, industries able to work with alternatives are concentrated in certain regions, whereas the others are still unable to work with other substances. Or for example, fumigation with methyl bromide takes only 24 hours, while fumigation with other substances would need around 5 to 10 days, what makes it a less competitive option. Still for the MB talk, it seems from the presentation that the main concerns expressed by the committee were related to non-compliance, but in the progress report they mentioned, and I quote, "Since alternatives are generally available for pre-shipment applications and owing to the confusion of the uses which satisfy the pre-shipment category, parties are urged to consider removing it from the QPS definition and only allowing exemptions for quarantine pass situations." We wanted to make sure that the concerns laid out in the presentation are correctly reflected in the report and vice versa. Brazil does not believe that the answer to non-compliance would be linked to removing a whole category from the list of exemptions, and if the MBTAC believes it to be the case, we're interested in knowing why. Also, given the difficulties parties still have in relation to even considering moving away from methyl bromide for QPS uses, this policy suggestion may go a little bit beyond what we would have expected, so we would appreciate more background. Lastly, on PFAs, the Chief mentioned that regulations can slow progress towards the implementation of the Kigali Amendment, and we wanted to understand which impacts exactly would we be talking about. Do we have estimates like Kuwait, Bahrain, Argentina? We would like to add our voice to the fact that uncertainty remains, and even though this is the fourth meeting that this issue has been raised. Thank you very much.
And the technical options committees for the great work of the progress report and for the presentation this morning. It is very informative. And thank you for the questions by other delegations. We had similar questions, so I'm not going to cover the same ones, but had a few questions to the FS talk. And the first question pertains to a mention in the progress report that there's some fire suppression applications in enduring uses where the alternatives to Halon 1301 are high GWP HFCs. And then there are some concerns that these fire suppression applications could be at risk of having to revert back to Halons. So we had a question to the FS talk if they have any information on what those specific applications are and what would be the impact on the run-out dates of Halon banks. Also, we note, as many others did, the FS talk's observations of the apparent similarities between the trends from derived emissions from atmospheric observations and the amount of reported production for feedstock use in the last several years. And we note with some, the especially apparent linkages in this last scenario presented where emissions rate of 26% in feedstock use seems particularly high given what is generally assumed for emissions rate in feedstock uses. So we note that the report indicate that the FS stock was not able to reconcile the emissions to existing patterns from emissions from banks. So we were wondering if the FS stock could elaborate as to why they believe that the emissions over the last few years could not be attributed to emissions from banks. And on a related topic for the MC talk, we were wondering if there are any known process for feedstock use of a controlled substance that could lead to emissions rate or emissions factor of 26% or thereabouts. Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
حيث أنها المرة الأولى التي نأخذ فيها الكلمة
time and therefore I would like to extend
إلى من تقدموا بالشكر والامتنان إلى سكرتارية الأوزون وجميع العاملين بها لتسهيل مهامها ولأداء الوثائق التي نحن
the preparation of the documents that we are discussing. We would like also to thank the people and government of Canada for hosting us in this beautiful city where we feel that this is our second home city.
أود أيضا أن أشكر
I would like to thank the co-chairs and to congratulate them for the successful leadership of this meeting. I would also like to extend my thanks to the TEEP and SAP as well as all the talks for the reports prepared, which are indeed rich in information that is useful for us in our work. I might be the last speaker and therefore I would like to focus on 3 points.
First,
regarding
the FTOC بالخاص الشريحة السادسة
the 6th slide in the presentation that mentioned that some Article 5 countries and non-Article 5 countries have used other alternatives
الغير اقتصادية
for HFCs because of the economic cost and criteria. Such countries might have projects to transitional projects in order to use such alternatives. And therefore, my question is, when these countries transition to non-fluorocarbon substances, you know that the IOC, it's different. There might be a difference between one alternative and the other, and I don't know if this is the right place to speak about this matter. However, I just wanted to mention this. My second point is addressed to RTOC, especially the 22nd slide in their presentation. The report mentioned challenges in the selection of alternatives to the electric vehicles ACs.
السيارات الأخرى.
What's the difference then between normal vehicles or cars and electric cars, and what are these challenges? The second point, the third point that I would like to raise regarding TEEP's work and what was mentioned in the 36th slide. The report mentioned the need
technical option committee إلى
of the technical options committees, the need for volunteering specialized experts, especially as a result of the depletion of such experts and the shortage of the experts because of certain financial constraints. However, we do understand the importance of the volunteering expert work for our activities. The report also mentioned the necessity to consider the provision of financial assistance and support to the qualified experts that we may need, especially if they were from non-Article 5 countries. As for the need for new qualified experts, I believe that the problem is how do we look for such experts in the non-Article 5 countries. However, in the developing countries and the Article 5 countries, there are so many brilliant brains and qualified experts at the highest level of knowledge. The problem is, how do we reach these people and how do we attract them so that they would volunteer to work as experts? I believe that if we find the right way to reach these people, they will be ready to volunteer. In my opinion, there might be a way or several ways. Maybe a developing country may select or nominate a number of experts, and this has happened before in cooperation with TEEP. Or there is another way. Sometimes TEEP members may know that there are certain experts in this or that country who have the expertise and who have the qualification, who have had studies published, who have contributed to international studies, and thus TEEP members can help in the outreach so that we can reach those peoples and discuss who among those experts might be the suitable ones to join our endeavors. And I come to the end of my intervention, and thank you for your attention. 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 Thank you for your attention.
And we have one more Trinidad and Tobago. After that, we will give the floor to Zambia.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Actually, it's Zimbabwe. I don't know, maybe the mic or the positioning of the technology. Nevertheless, thank you so much, Madam Co-Chair. And I also want to thank the Ozone Secretariat and the Government of Canada for the excellent arrangements for us to have this meeting. My issue is directed to the MB talk. I note with great appreciation that most Article 5 countries have not applied for critical use nominations, and I wanted the MB talk to share with us maybe experiences from countries that have faced methyl bromide on how the issues of handling empty methyl bromide cylinders were handled, or the disposal were implemented, because we have a lot of these cylinders, and considering that some have residual methyl bromide and chloropicrin, so maybe if they can share with us those experiences on the disposal of empty methyl bromide cylinders. Thank you so much.
In Tobago, last one on my list, 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 on my list.
This is the first time our delegation is taking the floor. I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to the Ozone Secretariat for their exceptional efforts in organizing and convening this meeting. I also wish to express my thanks to the host country, Canada, for the warm welcome hospitality in this beautiful city of Montreal. Furthermore, I would like to thank the TEEP for their comprehensive update on the technical review of alternatives to HFCs. In particular, this delegation would like further clarification on the health impacts of PFAS. Most recently, at the Caribbean Network meeting for the National Ozone Officers hosted 2 weeks back, we were exposed to a presentation on the potential human health and environmental impacts of PFAS. In its conclusion, it states, projected future increased loading of TFAS or TFAs to the environment because of the increased demand for cooling and continued use of HCFCs, HFCs, and replaced products judged to present a minimal risk to aquatic organisms and humans. So my question is, we are seeing many scientific research articles stating contrary evidence to the statement above on the health impacts of PFAS and TFAS. So can the TEEP or the Environmental Assessment Panel clarify the messaging we as national ozone officials should take on the issue of HFOs, PFAS and TFAS? Thank you.
Take up the questions on the methyl bromide made to the MEP talk. With respect to the comments and questions from Brazil, yes, indeed, MEP talk does take into account regional availability, logistics, and technical and economical feasibility of alternatives. In fact, during the long CUN assessment process, this was a key issue that we always took into account. So we are permanently gathering information in this respect, and so we agree with that statement and are very happy if you can provide us with information that is relevant. With respect to concerns on non-compliance and the pre-shipment, we believe there's a slight confusion here. MEPTOC is concerned that we find sources of information of places and instances where methylbromide might be being used outside the definitions of QPS or possibly for controlled uses. Being used in instances that do not fit these definitions of pre-shipment or quarantine. And as we showed this time and we have showed before, the pre-shipment has very specific timelines. It has to be done 21 days before the shipping of the goods. It has to be backed by an official resolution or legislation in the country that is in place before 1996, etc., etc. So if the use were to be done outside that definition or those precise requirements, then it would fall into non-compliant uses. That is our concern, that sometimes there is confusion or not enough understanding in the country using that methylbromide. When we suggest that perhaps the parties may want to look at removing or addressing pre-shipment uses, what we mean to say is we know there are readily available, technically and economically feasible alternatives for pre-shipment uses of methylbromide. Or, put more simply, they would be easy to replace to a certain extent. Not the same with quarantine, where it's much more difficult. So our suggestion has been, over the past few years, perhaps the parties would like to address these pre-shipment uses where alternatives exist. I hope I clarified, but if not, we're very happy to meet in the margins of the meeting and further discuss. And referring to the delegate from Zimbabwe about the empty cylinders, it is not the first time we hear this kind of situation. We have heard it from other countries. I remember, for example, Cameroon, possibly Ethiopia in the past, and others. This can be an issue, not knowing what to do with leftover methylbromide. You could always use it for QPS, for example, but and destroying it is probably going to be difficult to make it economically feasible. Perhaps we can make the suggestion of also discussing on the margins, and maybe other parties with this problem could also meet with the MedTalk, and maybe we can gather sufficient information to see if it's enough to try and provide a more general solution. Thank you very much.
Question from Canada. I think it was in two parts really. We're back to this 26% number again. Now we did, to be fair, consider other ways that we could have got to that level of emissions, not 26% of production. There were things like, maybe the reporting wasn't quite right, or they reported ODP tons, not tons, or they did that and then they did a double correction. Pretty much all of those other reasons have been ruled out. So we're back to, yes, it's 26% of the reported production. There could have been additional production that was not reported. That would lower the number, but we have that's just a numerical derivation. There's no evidence for that whatsoever. The other thing I think that might have confused some of the delegates, and I personally apologise, is we've been using the term emission factor here quite loosely. The MC-TOC, when they use the word emission factor, they are referring, I think, only to emission when something is produced, not any subsequent losses down the line. Is that correct, Helen? Yeah. No. Oh.
I can do an intervention.
Okay, all right. Oops. No, we're all going so well. Right. I'll go back to question. One thing I'm a little bit more certain of, the second part of Canada's question, why can't we correlate these emissions and these bulges in the emission profile as measured to emissions from a bank? The bank is finite. Well, first of all, those emissions are just too large. We queried our Fire Suppression Technical Options Committee members, what's the largest halon system you've ever seen? These emissions would be 100 times more than several of those systems being discharged at once. So, straight away, that is implausible. Secondly, the bank is finite. So if you have a large emission, some significant fraction of that, your new bank is smaller. So your new baseline, estimated at 4% per year, would be lower. What that curve cannot do is go up and come down to the same old baseline. It's not physically possible, so it has to be something that is not emissions from a finite bank. Was that? Thank you. 1 out of 2, not bad.
Second one.
Okay, so I will pick up the question from Canada that related to, that specifically asked us whether there are any known processes with emission factors as high as 26%. And perhaps I'll just, because of the discussion, perhaps I'll just take a step back and remind parties that the emission factors that we've developed, we've looked at kind of historic emission factors for historic manufacturing, and with the emission factors that we're applying now for modern day regulated manufacturing from production, supply chain and use of feedstock by weight of production. So we've looked at the older manufacturing facilities, and obviously they would have higher emission factors, but the ones that we're using to estimate emissions from feedstock production and use are for modern day regulated manufacturing facilities. So obviously, because we're talking about modelling, it's not exact. We're trying to estimate a broad range of substances and processes, and the modelling is helpful in making estimations to help you with your policy decision making. But then we're not providing you with exact answers. And it's a helpful policy tool, and obviously we will refine that over time when we get new information. In terms of the 26%, again, if you look at the progress report, and specifically in relation to the halon 1301 and the fipronil production, we said in the report that we didn't think that our most likely emission factors would be applicable for the use of halon 1301 in fipronil production. We thought it would be less applicable, and the reasons for this are the differences in the way that controlled substances are used as feedstocks and the processes that are used. And for the fipronil, the little information that we have was that the relevant process flow sheets and patents relating to the process routes to produce fipronil indicate differences with the use of halon 1301 feedstock. So there are small tonnage production where the halon 1301 is being fed in excess, so more than you need necessarily to get the product, and also with lower yields, so that there would be excess halon 1301 that would need to be recovered, recycled or incinerated. Now, obviously there's, so it's kind of plausible then that for that particular process you would have a higher emission factor than our generic most likely emission factors. And the same could be said for any small production facility, any semi-tech production facility, any pre-commercial pilot manufacturing facility, or an open process, because there might still be, for small production for example, open processes where they're not closed and it's very emissive. So obviously when we use our most likely emission factors, we have to kind of try and estimate the most likely, that's why we called it that, but there will be circumstances where that emission factor does not apply, and it seems to be the case that that would be so for fipronil production. I've got it, thank you. Thank you. Sorry, there was one other question about, I think it was from Tunisia? Yes, on PFAS, and we would like to defer to the Environmental Effects Assessment Panel to respond to that question.
The question was mainly on the toxicology of TFA, is that correct? I think it was Trinidad
repeat the question for TF to understand it better.
HFOs and what should our messaging be in terms of the human health impact? Sorry. The human health impact on essentially TFAs that are related to HFOs, because the report or the study showed that the risks of PFAS and TFAs to human health is minimal. So when we are discussing the whole issue of HFOs, what should our messaging be? Because they have other research stating contrary beliefs to what is stated in that report. So just to clarify, what's the extent of the health risks associated with PFAS and TFAs? Thank you.
Who would like to respond to that?
A lot of the studies in animals have been done on a laboratory scale, and even then the toxicity has not been found at so-called natural levels that we find in the environment. And because TFA is still very persistent in the environment, we continue to assess the possibilities for increased toxicity to animals, including humans. So at the moment, it does not seem that the amount of TFA in the environment is cause for a toxic response. The problem is that there is a lot of uncertainty about measurements and the source and fate transport from the atmosphere to water bodies. And just as an example, the concentration in global seawater of TFA is about 260 nanograms per liter. And the effect or the concentration that one would expect an effect from is about 10 million nanograms per liter. So there is a lot of uncertainty, and part of the uncertainty for characterizing the amount of TFA is because it is not only from the breakdown of the CFC replacements, but also the potential for TFA coming from natural sources, and these are very difficult to measure. So at the moment, we don't see high toxicity. However, there are ongoing studies trying to measure the possible toxicity levels, and so far it does not seem to be possible to have toxicity from global assessments. At the same time, there are point sources of high TFA levels, and that's perhaps also part of what the delegate from Trinidad might be referring to. And these come from factories that are producing CF3 moiety compounds for different uses like pharmaceuticals or pesticides, and even production of plastics. And the CF3 moiety is used because it gives stability to many compounds, and at these factories it's a large point source of TFA, and that is of concern to the people working in those areas or living near such a production plant, and perhaps drinking the water or eating plants, because plants also absorb the TFA. At the same time, when organisms take up TFA, for example in drinking water, because TFA is highly soluble in water, it's passed out and not accumulated in the organism. But we still are not aware of if there is a possibility that during the transport outside of the body that some damage could be done. The research is not quite at that level yet. I hope that helps to answer the question. Thank you.
I would like to give the floor to T.
I forgot to answer questions from India and then Egypt. India has shown concerns regarding phasing down and in the future phase out of HFC 152A, which is zero ODS but some GWP. Alternatives in A5 could be using CO2 with oxygenated blowing agent, which requires investment, but the other way being implemented is the usage of HFO 1234ZE in combination with oxygenated blowing agents or other with oxygenated blowing agent in order to reduce costs of this extruded polystyrene. I hope I have answered the question. Then the comment from delegation of Egypt regarding alternatives for HFCs in polyurethane foams in A5 parties. Basically, I have already comment on these options. Up front, we have to consider water as a blowing agent if the foam fits to the requirements, and then hydrocarbon if size of plants are applicable to recover investment, or moving to HFOs in combination with high level of water and combinations with other blowing agents for cost reduction to make foams more competitive. Thank you.
give the floor to TIP members, TIP members, TIP members, TIP members, TIP members, TIP members.
Delegate from Egypt. Related to the electric vehicles, the battery electric vehicles provide a challenge because we need to consider the thermal management or the cooling of electric batteries while also providing comfort to the cabin, which is also cooling and heating. This in itself requires a holistic view of the system that is going to provide cooling and heating, and sometimes it's going to be a heat pump, not just an air conditioner that is going to be serving the battery electric vehicle, and that's why there is a need to review and revise how that is why it's going to be different. Of course, current refrigerants, if just cooling the cabin versus cooling the cabin, the performance of the refrigerant should not be any challenge or any different. Thank you.
And last, from the distinguished delegate from Egypt, thank you so much for your comments. We thought that was a very thoughtful commentary that you made about some of the difficulties that we have of obtaining experts, particularly from both non-A5 and A5 parties. Really important that you look at our matrix of expertise and get into bilateral discussions with us about potential candidates. We really do welcome these. We have 150 experts in the TOCs, and so finding people to work in the TOCs really invaluable. And just on a point at the end, the members that you hear with their tremendous expertise here are doing this entirely voluntarily, in addition to their day jobs very often. And it's a right for A5 party TEEP members to get travel, but not non-A5. And that was okay when non-A5 members could easily get funded, but it's much more difficult now. And so that's why we asked to consider funding travel irrespective of A5, non-A5 status. It's true to say that Meg, thank you very much, the Urgent Secretary, does try and help us when we have exceptional problems. But it'd be so much easier if it was an automatic position. Not funding for time or work, just travel. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, TIP. Thank you very much for your hard work. And now I would like to close the question and answer, and would like to request TIP to go back to your seats, but please be alert in case we need to seek your clarification on other sub-items. And with this, now I open the floor for a discussion on sub-item 6A, on nominations for critical use exemptions for methyl bromide 2025. We heard from the chief that in 2024, one non-Article 5 party, Canada, submitted one nomination for critical use exemption for 2025. The MBTOC's evaluation is included in Volume 2 of TEEP's 2024 report, and a summary is included in the first addendum to the note by the Secretariat, document 46/2/Ed1. MBTOC will prepare a final report containing the final recommendations to be considered by MOP 36. So now I would like to open the floor to see if any party or parties would like to ask any questions or make any interventions.
I'm co-chair, and as the party nominating this year, we thought it would be appropriate for us to take the floor. First of all, we would like to thank the TEEP and the MBTOC in their work in reviewing the Canadian nomination, as well as the presentation that we have heard earlier. Canada recognizes the importance of demonstrating significant progress towards reducing the quantity of methyl bromide nominated, and Canada has committed to the phase out of methyl bromide. Since 2015, Canada's sole COE has been for pre-plant soil fumigation in the production of strawberry runners on Prince Edward Island by a single grower where chemical alternative fumigants remain unavailable. The nomination for 2025 is 2.85 tons of methyl bromide and represents a 26% reduction from the amount authorized for 2024 by decision 3515 and is significantly less than the 5.3 tons that would be required to fumigate the entire acreage under business as usual scenario. The nominated reduction for 2025 is based on the adoption of indoor soilless production for a significant portion of the operation, and while also recognizing that a proportion of the reduction is still likely to result from fumigating a smaller total acreage, while the grower works to prepare for complete transition to indoor soilless production in 2026. In 2023, after 4 seasons of positive research trials, Canada implemented a policy-based approach to the phase-out of methyl bromide by directing the grower to fully phase in indoor soilless production for G2 runner tips in 2025 and for the rest of the operation for 2026, thereby phasing out the last remaining COE by 2026. So in this regard, Canada considers that the indoor soilless production is a suitable non-chemical technical alternative to fumigation with methyl bromide for the grower's operation. So while the capital investment required for soilless production is high, we do not see this as a reason to delay transition for this operation. So Canada has carefully reviewed the interim report of the NBTOC and agrees with its interim recommendation of 2.85 tons for 2025, which was the amount nominated. And as was noted in the nomination, Canada has signaled that this will be the final nomination for this application. We look forward to the NBTOC's final recommendation ahead of the MOP this year, and should any parties have any questions with regards to Canada's nomination for 2025, we would be happy to engage in the margins. Thank you very much. 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 Thank you very much.
For the floor, you have the floor.
To thank NBTOC for their report and their presentation earlier. We would also like to recall that the EU has stopped the use of methyl bromide for all applications in 2010. Indeed, it is a great success that the amount of methyl bromide requested for critical use nominations has fallen from 2005 of approximately 19 tons to less than 3, and that today there is only 1 single nomination left to consider. For the nomination, we note with appreciation that the total amount requested represents a very considerable decrease of the amount approved last year for Canada. We also welcome the commitment made by Canada not to submit any further nominations after 2025, as well as the work already done to arriving on a suitable alternative. and we consider that this positive development should be reflected in the final decision at the MOP. At the same time, we are also concerned about the continued use of methyl bromide for quarantine and pre-shipment uses, even though clearly TIP points out that for most pre-shipment uses there are existing alternatives. We are also concerned that a significant amount of methyl bromide is still being used for non-QPS uses. It is clear to us that continued action is critical, especially since any reduction of methyl bromide is very quickly felt in the atmosphere. And the EU will certainly come back to this point at later meetings. Thank you very much. Very much. Very much. Very much. Very much. Very much.
You have the floor.
To everyone, Australia would just like to appreciate very much the considerable flexibility and progress that Canada has made in phasing out its use of methyl bromide for non-QPS uses. As a very recent recipient of critical use exemptions, we appreciate that it has been a very difficult transition in some cases, and that the approach they have taken, I'm sure, has not come without some considerable cost to the grower in question. In relation to our own situation, we would just like to advise that, as we had indicated at the MOP last year, we had expected that a methyl iodide chloropicrin mixture would be approved in December 2023 for use in soil fumigation for strawberry runners in Australia, and indeed our regulatory authority did approve that mixture. The strawberry runner growers in the region which had a CUE up until last year have commenced using this mixture for soil fumigation in 2024 with quite positive results so far, we are glad to advise. However, wet conditions in our autumn, which was May this year, has meant that most of the strawberry runner soil fumigation this year will actually occur in our spring, which will be the northern fall, and so we will have more results and much more certainty about where we sit with ending our critical use nominations towards the end of the year. So we are quite confident about our situation, and we look forward to being able to report on that to parties in the future. Just as a matter of administration, we actually wonder whether there is any need for separate reports by the Methyl Bromide Technical Options Committee any longer, and we suggest actually that perhaps from next year that its updates on all issues can be provided in the regular progress report. Thank you.
Reflected in the meeting report, and with this I would like to close this agenda item for this meeting, and the discussions will be continued at MOP in Bangkok with TIP's final recommendations. And now I hand over to my co-chair for the next sub-items. Thank you.
Agenda item 6B, energy efficiency, and we just heard the progress report of TEEP, and I would like to ask the delegations who would like to take the floor on this to clearly indicate that and then continue the discussion. And I have India here on as the first one. India, please, you have the floor.
Mr. Co-Chair, we feel the discussion in this forum should be on maintaining and or enhancing energy efficiency in the context of HFC phase down, including on the deliberations and decisions of the Executive Committee of the MLF on the issues deliberated and initiatives taken on other conventions which are in different contexts. For example, the global cooling pledge would dilute the focus of the deliberations on the issues in this forum. We feel the TIP should continue to provide updated information on energy efficiency in the annual progress report, in the context maintaining and or enhancing energy efficiency in the context of HFC phase down, and the decision taken in the MOP and Executive Committee on the issue. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
For the floor, Micronesia, United States and Malaysia I have on my list, and please indicate if you would like to speak. First, Micronesia.
I would like to thank the TEEP for its update on energy efficiency in the progress report. We are encouraged by the progress on this issue. In addition to the growing compendium of information from the TEEP reports, there are some positive advances in the EXCOM discussions towards supporting countries' energy efficiency efforts. And yet we must redouble our efforts. Access to efficient low GWP cooling equipment is more and more important in our rapidly warming world. Each year is breaking global temperature records. Around 30% of the global population is exposed to deadly heat for at least 20 days a year, and many still have no access to cooling. In fact, less than 10% of people living in the hottest parts of the world have air conditioners, while millions of people lack safe, reliable refrigeration for health supplies and food storage. In the Pacific Islands, this is a life-threatening situation. Despite our efforts to provide access to cooling to our population and strengthen our cold chains, we lack resources and technical capacity to keep up with the pace of warming. At the same time, the increased cooling demand is crippling our energy system at great cost to our government and our people. The situation is not sustainable, and for many, not even survivable. We imagine this is the case for many A5 countries, especially for the islands among us. Ensuring improved energy efficiency in the RAC sector is a critical piece of equity equation in ensuring equitable access to cooling. Mr. Co-Chair, we are encouraged by the positive advances on energy efficiency in our forum over the years. Yet we believe that we can and must do more. The climate crisis is dire and getting worse. It is time we respond accordingly, moving beyond business as usual at a faster pace and with an attitude that matches the gravity of the circumstances. An attitude that solves problems, facilitates action, accelerates spending, and seizes the day. For example, I would like to spotlight one example of where we can do better. We note that the pilot window in the Multilateral Fund for Energy Efficiency has only allocated 6 of the $20 million in the window, and most of the projects are relatively small, non-investment projects. This delegation is concerned at the lack of diversity in number of projects in the pipeline. Considering the need among all A5 countries, we would expect to see more high-quality projects. It raises the questions, what are the obstacles, and what actions and support could help countries generate more projects? It is time to explore ways to enhance both the quality and scope of project proposals for this window and for the future support under the operational framework. We no longer need reasons or arguments for why to do it. We need more solutions for how. We offer the following suggestions for the parties' consideration on ways the protocol could seize this opportunity. First, following the lead of the Africa Center of Excellence for Sustainable Cooling and Cold Chain Systems, the parties may consider ways to support other regional centers of excellence. These centers could strengthen the pipeline of quality projects for financing under the multilateral fund of the protocol. Second, we suggest increasing synergies between HFC phase down and energy efficiency by encouraging more energy efficiency strategies to be included in KIPs. Third, building on the operational framework on energy efficiency under development with the MLF, we suggest preparing a practical manual on energy efficiency measures that could be used by ozone units and implementing agencies to help guide the formulation of projects and national plans. And finally, we note that every institution that is part of the protocol, including the secretariats, implementing agencies, and ozone units, could do more if they were strengthened with energy efficiency expertise. The scope of the TEEP does not extend to supporting these institutions directly. And without internal expertise, the institutions will be limited in their ability to do more in the area of energy efficiency. We look forward to working with parties to continue our progress on energy efficiency. We believe that a contact group to discuss options and work toward a decision at MOP would be the best way to give this important the attention it deserves. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
States, Malaysia, and Barbados on my list. This 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 on my list.
In the TEEP for the excellent update on energy efficiency. In particular, this year we were pleased to see the excellent information about the huge climate mitigation opportunity that energy efficiency offers. In particular, they noted that with improved energy efficiency and a faster phase down of HFCs, we could avert up to 60% of the predicted emissions from the cooling sector by 2050. And when the potential benefit is so large, we do think it is crucial that we seize the opportunity, as the distinguished delegate from Micronesia noted, in order to make sure that we are able to reap these benefits that are possible for us here. We're pleased to see that the cooling issue, reducing emissions in cooling, has been getting a lot of political attention. The TEEP highlighted some of this in their update. In particular, we note that the COP28 adopted a global cooling pledge, which at the time of the report had 70 signatories. We think that this kind of attention on this issue shows that we really have a chance to seize momentum right now and make very good progress. I think most exciting for this delegation, we saw at the XCOM meeting, this was an outcome too late for the report, but the TEEP did note it in their presentation just a little while ago, that there was the $100 million made available over the next 3 years for for the operational framework on energy efficiency and refrigeration and air conditioning manufacturing sectors. And we know that this is just this for the first 3 years, and we did the XCOM did agree that this funding could be augmented. So the XCOM has recognized that there is a huge opportunity here as well, and we encourage countries with refrigeration and air conditioning manufacturing to include energy efficiency projects with their KIPs, or if in the cases where KIPs have already been approved, additional projects to come in with their KIPs. We think that if countries come forward, we have this opportunity to really maximize the climate benefits of the Kigali Amendment, and we don't want to make sure that we are seizing this momentum while it's here. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Mr. Co-Chair. Mr. Co-Chair. Mr. Co-Chair. Mr. Co-Chair. Mr. Co-Chair. Mr. Co-Chair.
You have your younger generation next to you to support you with this intervention, so much broader US delegation, so welcome. Then I have Malaysia on my list. Please, Malaysia.
Thanks the TIP Task Force for their excellent work on the 2024 Progress Report. Updates on the information of energy efficiency while facing down HFCs in the refrigerant, air conditioning and heat pump sectors. Mr. Co-Chair, Malaysia has committed to achieving the goal of net zero GHG emissions by 2050. Malaysia has developed the National Energy Transition Roadmap to accelerate the energy transition efforts into a low-carbon future. In this regard, Malaysia's Kigali Implementation Plan has established strategies for phasing down HFCs that aim to balance the actions required to meet our obligations under the Montreal Protocol and national commitments on climate change. This balance promotes sustainability, green growth, and improve energy efficiency and fosters a low-carbon economy in key industrial sectors such as refrigeration, air conditioning, and heat pumps. We acknowledge the progress reports updates that different regions have various approaches, policies, action plans, and regulatory frameworks to achieve the common objective of increasing access to sustainable cooling and phasing down high GWP HFCs for climate benefit. Malaysia urged the TIP to continue updating regional information on enhancing energy efficiency while phasing down HFCs. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Barbados.
It's the first time that my delegation is taking the floor. I wish to thank the Government of Canada for hosting us in Montreal. I also wish to express my appreciation to the Ozone Secretariat for the preparations made for this meeting, especially facilitating my delegation's participation. Additionally, I also wish to thank the members of the TEEP for their dedication to preparing these assessment and other reports as the parties demand and on a voluntary basis. The report, as presented, is very detailed and contains important and useful information. My delegation wishes to support the interventions made by the distinguished delegates from India and Micronesia on the matter of energy efficiency. This remains a significant and important issue for A5 parties, and the work should continue to provide updated information on new technologies, trends, challenges, barriers, and so on. And additionally, and more importantly, the provision of technical and financial support for the development and implementation of EE activities remains critical. Thank you.
Ghana, but I would like to ask if there are parties who would like to intervene. Press the button now, because I will read out now the list that I have in front of me. It's Ghana, Australia, Kuwait, and the EU. And I don't see anybody else. So this is the end of the list. So Ghana, Australia, Kuwait, and EU. And Ghana, you have the floor. Oh, I see. It's not Ghana, 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 it's not Ghana.
And we're brothers, so we could go for one another. So, Mr. Chair, thank you very much, and thank you too for giving me the opportunity to speak on this very, very, very important issue. So first of all, I would like to thank the TEEP for the work that they have done in preparing the documents and submitting it for our perusal and for the opportunity to engage. I would just like to reflect first of all on maybe a slight omission from the progress report with regards to section 6.3.1, which basically examines progress with regional approaches. And I note the omission of a regional approach by CARICOM through the Caribbean Regional Organizations for Standards and Quality, we call CROSQ, where they have developed regional standards, including minimum energy performance standards for refrigerating and air conditioning appliances. And I note that this has not been included under that particular subsection. So for the consideration of the report. Mr. Chair, I would like to proceed by just stating some basic observations with regards to my country and energy efficiency. Over the last couple of years, we've seen a record-breaking installation and importation of air conditioning equipment. And that is principally driven by increased global atmospheric temperatures and people's ability to afford to purchase and operate these appliances. I want to further state that 95% of the electricity that is produced in Grenada comes from petroleum-based sources such as diesel. Further, 46% of the electricity that is consumed is used in unitary air conditioning systems, and up to 60% is used for refrigeration and air conditioning. In some buildings, as a matter of fact, up to 90% of the electricity is used for the rack sector. So obviously, there's a huge mitigation potential in addressing this sector in regards to energy efficiency and also with regards to using refrigerants with much lower global warming potential. Having stated that, Mr. Chair, the key focus for us now is to address areas of energy efficiency, because from studies that we've conducted, the emissions gains from energy efficiency is about 80% in terms of the indirect emissions as compared to 20% from direct emissions. So we see that as a major area to address in Grenada. And so we have already established a number of policies, including minimum energy performance standards for that particular sector. But I want to say that with regards to the funding levels that are available from the multilateral fund, we consider that to be significant or grossly insufficient to augment the programs and initiatives that we want to undertake. So we're very grateful for the funding window of $100,000 that has been approved for developing countries like ours. And we note with concern that of the $100 million that has been made available, it only addresses a particular sector that does not include countries like mine. And so we're hoping that there would be further discussions that will address this issue to allow for additional funding to be made available for some of the low-volume consuming countries. I want to therefore offer these recommendations as we address this particular issue of energy efficiency: that we need to review the criteria or to establish new criteria that will allow for more parties to take advantage of the funding windows that are made available, that we need to make the funding windows much larger than they are currently, and that we also need to introduce renewable energy technologies to generate electricity to power these appliances. Having already mentioned that 95% of the electricity produced in my country comes from petroleum-based sources. And this is particularly important for us in the context of climate change and its impact on island states. Many of you may be aware that last Monday, around this time, Grenada and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Jamaica and some parts of Barbados were ravaged by a Category 4 hurricane. As a matter of fact, islands had to be completely evacuated because it couldn't sustain living. And these are direct impacts from what is happening because of increased use of energy, especially dirty energy that has been generated from petroleum-based sources. But energy efficiency is considered as one of the low-hanging fruits that can help us reduce a lot of the emissions that are generated from rack appliances. And therefore, with the recommendations we mentioned earlier, I'm hoping that this August body, through the meeting of the parties, through the EXCOM, can really give considerations and special considerations, I keep harping on that all the time, for low-volume consuming countries with special needs and peculiar circumstances to be able to access these funding levels in a much easier manner that we can address all of these issues related to energy efficiency, HFC phase down, and the impacts that they have in our countries. Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair.
What happened with the hurricane. I have one question. You mentioned it, a recommendation. Are you thinking of, let's say, putting forward a CRP at a certain moment, or how should we see this recommendation?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and if I may respond immediately. Discussions are ensuing to look at a collective approach with some other parties with similar interests. But in due course, the co-chairs will be advised of that as we approach the MOP, but this is under consideration at the moment. Thank you.
The TEEP for its very useful update. And the information that is provided for the parties. We note that the TEEP advice that refrigeration and air conditioning and heat pump equipment using low and medium GWP refrigerants with enhanced energy efficiency is now available in all sectors, but not necessarily in all countries. The establishment of increasingly ambitious MEPs and other energy efficiency policies by countries will help drive the penetration of new energy efficient technologies into new markets. And we encourage parties to consider these types of policies as a means to enhance the climate benefit and the energy security benefits of the HFC phase down. Identifying the life cycle benefits of energy efficiency to consumers and to the broader economy, as well, along with well-directed regulations, are key drivers to increasing the uptake and ambition of energy efficiency policies. We note that several elements highlighted in recent TEEP reports and the workshop last year are already being acted upon by the Executive Committee. Low-volume consuming countries are now able to augment their HCFC phase-out management plans by upskilling RAC technicians to integrate servicing for energy efficiency into training and to also work more closely with their energy efficiency colleagues, a point which was made by the Federated States of Micronesia in terms of increasing domestic energy efficiency capacity. A funding window for pilot energy efficiency projects has been opened in the Multilateral Fund, which will help countries implementing agencies in the EXCOM to learn by doing in relation to developing, assessing, implementing and reporting on HFC phase-down projects with energy efficiency elements. And like the Federated States of Micronesia and the US, we also encourage countries to submit projects under this window and to look at a wide variety of projects and the quality of projects that can be submitted and are available. The 2023 TEEP report also indicated more work could be done with the assembly sector, and we're pleased that the EXCOM has commenced work in the assembly and end-use sectors to identify them more clearly and to facilitate their transition to energy-efficient, low GWP technologies. And as the US indicated at its most recent meeting in May, it seems like a longer time ago than that, the EXCOM agreed to funding modalities to fund investment projects which address energy efficiency while phasing down HFCs, and opened up a $100 million window for these projects. And in relation to the concerns expressed by Grenada, that further work on non-investment elements in relation to this funding modality will be considered at EXCOM 95. There are concrete opportunities under the EXCOM and many opportunities to incorporate energy efficiency activities into HPMPs and into Stage 1 Kigali implementation plans should countries so wish, and with the support of the MLF. Many countries have already taken advantage of these opportunities in augmenting their HPMPs and incorporating energy efficiency elements into the KIPs. We think it is important that countries are given time to contemplate the opportunities that are available to them and to take advantage of these opportunities that are already available or will become available in coming meetings. Thank you, Co-Chair. The Chair. The Chair. The Chair. The Chair. The Chair.
You have the floor.
The work of the TIP on their report about the energy efficiency, as a lot of you knows that we're coming from a hot ambient temperature country, and for the time being in 2024, I think we will have two hats in for our heads, and other countries will be hot countries now because of the temperature and raise. You can facilitate that. In my country last week, the temperature was 54 degrees Celsius, and this is a very challenging for us for getting energy efficient equipment and how to deal with that energy, because of the demand of cooling is very highly used in our country. Access to most efficient energy air conditioning systems are difficult, but we are having a lot of challenges in these subsectors, but we are facing another issue, which is that we don't have accessibility for most efficient and energy equipment for that temperatures and that regional temperature. Things that we are doing on the GCC countries, that Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, and Emirates, we are doing a unified regulation for energy consumption. We already have a unified energy labeling system which being approved for the GCC, and also there are initiatives happening in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia for incentivize of changing energy equipment to an energy equipment with the support of the private sector. Also happening in Bahrain that they have now MIPS, a new MIPS for the small equipment, and like this. Kuwait and the other countries will also engage in going to the seasonal MIPS that will indicate for a better energy efficient using and calculating about seasonal. The issue for us now within the frame of alternatives and going to the new era, that our countries in GCC, we are not looking for the refrigerant or alternative itself. We are going beyond the refrigerant, and we are going beyond the box to investigate how we will reuse the load calculation in our country and how to shape the peak use of our demand of energy. I think the most important thing that in the GCC countries, as Kuwait one of them, we have building codes now. It consists of very, very, very highly insulation parameters and indicators, and also we have building codes for glasses and everything there. It have to be within that one. The other thing that our countries are food colony, and we don't have any agricultures in Kuwait, so everything as a food is imported, and then we have the cold chain from the beginning to the end, and also the distribution of these ones. So I think we are facing a lot of challenges, but we are willing to work with that one. I think in my point of view for the update information for the energy efficiency, that the task force of TIEB and the RTOC and TIEB look of how we are engaging with the end users rather than looking to the equipment on theoretically and on thesis as on paper or on rig. I think consultations between us is that the TIEB mandate is just to consult in a different manner. I think the consultation with the equipment supplier and energy auditing authorities will be very highly appreciated to understand there are differentiation between the energy consumption between countries and countries. One last comment. The problematic issue that we are looking now is that when we buy the equipment, we have a labeling of energy that indicate that this equipment will work with this energy, but it's never been investigated the line of energy degradations within time frame. I will buy it today, after 1 month the degradation in my country will be 20% of that energy. Then after 1 year this unit is not efficient as it's being sold, as it's been indicated. So I think TIAB have also to look to that parameter that of energy degradation within time frame. So we think this is a very good chance for us to update and to work very highly with the energy efficiency. Thank you very much. 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 Thank you very much.
The EU, and then we'd like to consult for a moment here on the podium. EU. So maybe that helps for the technician, for the technician, for the technician, for the technician, for the technician.
Maybe that can be corrected for the next sessions. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. We welcome the TIAB report. We welcome also that clearly awareness has increased of the importance of energy efficiency in the REC HP equipment since the Global Cooling Pledge. The TIAB report revisits the findings that we heard yesterday already, that leak prevention is of importance to maintain energy efficiency and as such create co-benefits. And we also appreciate the information of the continued progress and rollout of MEPs and other types of activities, as the previous speaker also pointed out, in a number of Article 5 countries. We appreciate that the report looks into the recent developments related to energy efficiency under the specific window under the multilateral fund, but we, as other speakers, would like to underline that significant progress has been made since then, also under the multilateral fund. In reaction to several requests for continued information from TIAB on energy efficiency, the EU is in a similar position that we would welcome this type of information, and we point out that under decision 34.3, we think we already asked the TIAB to continue to report on this in its progress reports. Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. Chair. 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 Chair.
Our proposal is to keep this item open for this meeting, and then also parties who indicated that they were working on, let's say, some ideas and maybe a CRP, and then come back to this at a later stage here in this meeting. That would be my proposal. So I don't see any objections to that. So we come back to this issue at a later moment and see if there are, let's say, CRPs or proposals coming forward. Then I would like to go to the agenda item 6C, panel membership changes. Table 5 of Addendum 1 to the note by the Secretariat, document 46/2 at 1, lists TIAB members whose terms expires at the end of 2024 and whose reappointment requires a decision by the MOP. The members of the TOCs whose terms expire at the end of the year and whose reappointment doesn't require a MOP decision are listed in Annex 3 to the same document. The nominations to TOC can be made at any time to the TIAB and TOC co-chairs. So we are not taking this up at this OEWG or the MOP. With regard to the nominations for TIAB that include the TOC co-chairs and senior experts, no nominations have received so far. When they are received by the Secretariat, they will be, of course, posted on the meeting portal. Note that nominating parties usually wait until the time of the MOP to submit their nominations. So it's good that you know that the Secretariat will post these nominations in the meeting portal as soon as they come. I would like to suggest that interested parties consult each other and also the TEEP informally, as was clearly indicated several times by TEEP itself, in the margin of this meeting, with a view to deciding on the nominations at MOP 36 later this year. My proposal is to close this agenda item for this meeting. I don't see any objections to that. So if that's agreeable to all the delegates, then I would hand over once again to my co-chair, Miguza, please, Miguza, please, Miguza, please, Miguza, please, Miguza, please, Miguza, please.
We will turn to agenda item 6D on any other issues. And I would also like to note that we are far behind the schedule. And with regard to this agenda item, at the time of the adoption of the agenda, there were no additional issues raised to be discussed under this agenda item. So therefore, we will close this agenda item. And now I will move to agenda item 7 on climate-friendly alternatives for metered-dose inhalers. At MOP 35, during the presentation by the assessment panels on their synthesis report for the 2022 coordinal assessment, one representative requested that the issue of the use of alternative substances in metered-dose inhalers be added to the agenda of this meeting, OEWG46. As indicated in document 46/2/Ed1, Section 5.9 of the 2020 TEEP Progress Report provides update on MDI and other aerosols. The key messages of the Medical and Chemicals Technical Options Committee are reproduced in Annex 1 to that addendum. So with that, now I open the floor for discussion on this agenda item. You have the floor. 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 You have the floor.
This agenda item on the agenda, as this party had requested at the MOP last year. This is an important issue for us. New propellants are about to be introduced to the market in metered-dose inhalers. And in the EU, several manufacturers have publicly announced that they will start introducing the new propellants in 2025 and switch their whole portfolio by 2030. So our medical agency, EMA, expects first applications for Q4 2024 for metered-dose inhalers with new propellants that have a low GWP propellant. In the TEEP report, we read that phase downs in non-A5 countries and the phase down in the EU and in the US are mentioned, incentivizing the introduction of these low GWP alternatives, given the higher prices for high GWP HFCs. The TEEP report also alerts us to the fact that MDIs with low GWP propellants are starting to be produced also outside the EU, including in Article 5 countries. And in the presentation earlier today, we heard that at least 10 companies globally are considering this or are in the process of introducing these new propellants, and they would be available from 2026 in Article 5 countries. The TEEP report further says that the introduction will happen rather sooner than later. We had a side event at this meeting yesterday with industry and our medical agency, and it was a very interesting discussion. And just to alert parties that were not able to attend, that the slides are available on the website from this event. Tomorrow, IPAC, which are the manufacturers, and with a more global view, having another event that will be informative for parties on this issue. So the medical approval processes need to be well prepared by the relevant authorities and companies. This is a long process requiring coordination between these players, including environmental authorities. There are also ways of reducing data requirements for companies by working together, including by application in other regions and countries. So, for instance, if there is an application elsewhere, this data can be used for making an application in the EU. Some of the medical agencies have started to talk to each other and to industry on this topic. It is important to further raise awareness among policymakers on these new options, as well as to liaise with the health agencies to provide the relevant approval, to support the relevant approval processes. Furthermore, we need to ensure that globally we work together to ensure smooth transitions. So while countries may be in different positions, some are manufacturers, including for exports, some are only importers, some are only producing for the local market, the patients in all countries would all benefit from a smooth transition process. So given these ongoing developments, where the industry is moving forward, and the necessity to maintain availability and affordability of medicines, we have prepared a CRP on these issues that we are submitting to the Ozone Secretariat, and will present it as soon as it has been uploaded and parties have been able to see it. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
To thank MC Talk of TEEP for updated information and the presentation. Madam Co-Chair, MDIs is an important sector and needs careful consideration in the context of HFC phase down. It may be recalled that during the CFC phase out for the MDI sector, the provisions of essential use nominations was considered for countries through a decision by the parties. In the context of HFC phase down, the national processes framework place for trials and approval of the formulations for proposed low GWP alternatives needs careful consideration. As per our understanding, based on the interaction with the MDI industry stakeholders, the proposed alternatives still needs to be matured for initiating trials and approval process. Madam Co-Chair, we need to understand more on the penetration of the said alternatives in the Article 5 countries, considering the technical feasibility and economic viability. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Requesting for the floor, and I would like to close the list now, and we have United States and Canada as well. And if any party would like to take the floor, this is the time. And now I would like to give the floor to Cuba.
First time we take the floor, so we would like to thank the Government of Canada for the warm welcome and hospitality you've shown us, and also thank the Secretary for all of the preparatory work for this meeting. And we would like to convey our sincere condolences to the family of those who died recently during the hurricane that passed through our region. And Cuba has made public its wish to support all of its sister countries affected by the hurricane in our region. Following up on the intervention by the EU yesterday, we were able to participate in a very interesting workshop where there were discussions on alternatives to these types of products. Cuba, as a producer, has a production line of inhalers. 10% of its population suffers from asthma and depends on this type of medication.
Por supuesto, estamos haciendo estudios
we are
para tener una idea de
conducting
cuáles
studies
serían las alternativas más
examine the
eficientes
most efficient
para integrarla
alternatives
en este tipo
integrate
de
those
industria.
in this
Por
type of
supuesto, para el
industry.
mercado doméstico, es para nuestros
Clearly, for
pacientes.
the domestic
La línea
market
actual
and
tiene
our patients,
una
the
capacidad
current
de 100
line
millones de unidades al
has
año.
a
O
capacity
sea
of
que,
10 million
logrando en caso de que la
devices a
propuesta,
year, and
como
given
comentaba el delegado
the proposal
de
being
la Unión
commented on
Europea,
by the
fuera
European
favorable,
Union being
se verían
favorable,
reducciones bastante grandes de
it
HFC
would give rise to
en el caso
significant
de nuestro
reductions
país.
in HFCs
Por supuesto,
in
tendríamos que
our
esperar los
country.
resultados
Of course,
de
we
todas
have to
estas
wait
investigaciones en la
for
aplicación
the
en los
findings
seres
of all
humanos,
of these
pero
different trials
realmente
in humans.
cuando fuimos ayer al
But
taller
when we attended the workshop yesterday,
aprendimos muchas
we
cosas, pero
learned a
también
great number of
salimos del
things,
taller con
but we
muchas dudas,
also
dudas
left the
relacionadas
workshop with
con
many questions
la cantidad
in
de
relation
cambio
to
tecnológico que nos
quantity
veríamos
of
obligados a hacer
technological
en la
changes we
línea
would be
actual,
obliged to make
los
to our
precios
current
de los
lines,
nuevos, de las
the
alternativas,
prices of the alternatives,
capacidad de producir
the
los que
capacity
vayan
to
a producir
produce
estas alternativas de
these
satisfacer la
alternatives
demanda global,
to
porque
actually
al final
satisfy global
el asma
demand.
es una enfermedad
Asthma, after all,
que afecta
is
a
a
todo nuestro
disease
planeta
that affects
y por
our
supuesto
entire
eso es una
planet.
gran preocupación
And
en
so
cuanto
it is a
sería
big
importante
concern.
saber y tener
It's
una idea
important
de
to have a
estudio
good
de,
idea,
eso,
a good
de la
study
sostenibilidad
on
con
the
relación a estas alternativas
these
al gas, por ejemplo,
alternatives,
el 134A
the
que usamos en nuestro
134A,
país.
for instance, that
En
we
este
use.
caso sería
Now, in this
simplemente
instance,
un llamado a continuar
this is an
estudiando,
appeal to
profundizando
continue
y
further
en caso de
studies.
que surjan
And
estas
in
nuevas,
the
sean
event
aprobadas estas nuevas
these new
alternativas,
alternatives are
realmente
approved,
poder tener acceso a ellas y tener
to
el
be able to
apoyo
have
del Fondo
access to
Multilateral,
them
por
and
supuesto,
to
para
get the
poder
support of the
lograr
multilateral fund to be able to
lo que llamamos un cambio tecnológico dentro de la
achieve
línea
what would be
de
a
producción que tenemos
technological
en nuestro
change
país.
in
Muchas
our
gracias.
production line, in our cunt 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 line, in our cunt.
States and Canada. With that, I would like to close the list and would like to give the floor to Switzerland.
L'utilisation des AFC en tant que gaz propulseur dans des EDI ne doit pas être négligée, spécialement en ce qui concerne les AFC ayant un potentiel de réchauffement global élevé. D'une part, les émissions dans l'atmosphère ne peuvent pas être éliminées, évitées. D'autre part, il semble que des alternatives vont bientôt être disponibles. La Suisse est intéressée à en apprendre davantage sur l'évolution de l'état de la technique en ce qui concerne cette application et pense que la discussion doit être continuée.
believes that the
Merci.
discussion must continue. Thank you.
We heard quite a discussion this morning, and there were some questions as well during the discussion with the TEEP. Metered dose inhalers for the treatment of asthma and COPD is of great importance to this delegation, I think all delegations in this room. We've heard a couple interventions just now that highlighted the health effects and the need to have sufficient medication available. From this delegation's point of view, we're quite encouraged by what we have been hearing from the TEEP and from in our own country of developments, but they seem like they're at early stages still. These companies are looking at the R&D process. We heard some thought about some information about some early trials. The European Union noted that they are expecting to get their first applications later this year. So from this delegation's point of view, one of the questions we have is really about timeliness and what we're trying to move forward with. The Kigali Amendment set forth the idea that we would have a phase down over a period of time and that countries would make their own domestic decisions as to what to prioritize first. And in particular, we looked at some of the past phase-outs that we had under the ODS regime and decided not to include certain aspects of those that provided an ordering of what chemicals to focus on first or what uses to look at first. And in this case, we made the decision not to do so and to leave that in the hands of the parties. We think that's an important principle to keep in mind because we know in our own country, we will be looking at a variety of end uses, but this is not an end use that we intend to be starting with. It's one of the ones that we think would probably be later in terms of transition. Other countries can make other decisions on that. We also note that there is a cost implication. I think we heard both India and Cuba note the complexity. Cuba noted that they learned about some additional points on complexity. India also noted complexity as something to keep in mind. From our point of view, this is a complex transition. There are health implications. There are doctor-patient communication implications. There is also cost and capacity implications. We also saw the TEEP provided information on two potential alternatives, one of which is still a controlled substance, so we should keep that in mind as well. I think we are interested in following this and pursuing it. It may be premature for us to think that we need a decision specifically on MDIs, and we could rely at this point on the information that we are getting, both at home but also from the TEEP and their quadrennial assessment report. We're certainly open-minded to see what is put forward and to see if there's something there that makes sense, but I think from this delegation's point of view, at this stage in the transition, our interest is simply ensuring that there is adequate work going on, and what we heard from the TEEP was that there was, and we also heard that their expectation is that they don't anticipate seeing alternatives even begin to enter the market sooner than 2026. So I think we'll continue our view is to continue to watch and monitor, see what we can do to encourage. But again, we're open-minded to see what is put forward in the CRP that we understand will be posted later in this meeting. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Madam Co-Chair, first of all, I'd like to thank the TEEP and in particular its Medical Technical Options Committee for the wealth of information that it's already provided to us on this issue. And I'm referring not only to the 2024 progress report, but in the quadrennial assessment report of 2022. The MC Talk provided really a lot of interesting information, observations, data, which we did not have time to consider last year due to the heavy agenda of the meeting. But we did consider the information they provided with a lot of interest. So we just wanted to thank them for that. As a general matter, Canada supports activities that can facilitate transition to lower GWP MDIs, as well as other alternative products that can offer the same care to patients that is provided by the current generation of MDIs. However, we do feel that any discussion on this issue should be that as any transition occurs, it should be with a view to maintain the availability and access of critical medicines for patients. We also note, like the United States just did before us, that it's still early days in terms of the transition, and that the Kigali Amendment, for most countries at least, should allow sufficient supply for HFCs, for MDIs, for many years to come. However, there are some exceptions. Cuba, for instance, took the floor, previously, and we understand that in their case, perhaps the consumption of HFCs for MDIs is higher than what it is for other countries. In most countries, it's a very small percentage of their overall consumption, and countries have the flexibility on whether or not they want to prioritize this sector, which, as has been mentioned, by the U.S. and others, presents a lot of complexity with respect to the transition. However, irrespective of the phase-out schedule of the Kigali Amendment and what would be the priorities of countries, we're aware, based on the information provided by the TEEP and others, that there are activities underway right now by the private sector, and within the EU to take steps towards this transition, and in the healthcare sector to reduce the overall climate impact linked to the use of MDIs. This information was provided in the TEEP MC Talk report. We also attended a side event by the EU yesterday. We know there's another side event coming up on this issue. So even though in principle there should be no big hurry, at least for most parties, to undertake this transition, there are activities that are going on. And they're fairly important because these activities could impact many countries. So we noted in the quadrennial assessment that there are 3 global pharmaceutical companies and 1 major developer of PMDIs that plan to reformulate the propellants, and that this represents up to 70% of MDI revenue in the United States and the EU market, and that there are 10 or more companies with active programs for developing alternative propellants, and that the first of such product could potentially become available on the global market as early as 2026. So I think we agree that it's still early 2020, 2026, it's going to be only some products, but it seems that perhaps some years after that, there could be some major transitions that go underway. So in that sense, it may be premature, as the U.S. has said, to take a decision, but we think it is timely for the parties to actually have a discussion, at least on this issue, preliminary exchange of views and information. And in that sense, we thank the EU for having suggested to put this issue on the agenda. We just want to take a few minutes to highlight some of the key issues that the TEEP has identified could emerge or potentially emerge in the transition to low GWP MDIs. I think some of them were already mentioned by the EU, but they include the effects of different timelines in the regulatory approvals, the higher cost of alternatives, devices using lower GWP alternatives, the need for patient adaptability with respect to new devices or other not-in-kind devices such as dry powder inhalers or soft mist inhalers, the impact of environmental legislation in various countries, the continuity in and the stability of the supply of pharmaceutical grade HFCs for MDIs is a concern that the TEEP raises, as well as the rising cost of bulk HFC 134A and HFC 227EA propellants, which could lead to increases in the price of HFA MDIs. So all these issues could pose risk to the availability and or affordability of treatment for patients suffering from asthma, COPD, or even other conditions that require inhaled therapy. In light of this, the TEEP suggested that parties may wish to consider, and the TEEP didn't say when, but it suggested that in this quadrennial assessment, may wish to consider the need for global and national coordination in the HFC phase down and its impact on the transition away from high GWP HFC MDIs in order to ensure patient safety. So taking all this into account, Canada believes that at this point, parties may not be in a position to actually encourage or promote transition away from HFCs in MDIs. But as a first step, parties need to strengthen their knowledge and understanding of all the complex aspects of the transition that appears to have already started to some extent, with a view to ensuring that any transition that does take place is as smooth as possible and protects patient health and safety. With that in mind, Canada supports robust discussion among parties, as well as involving experts from the TEEP, in order to identify information that would allow parties to the Montreal Protocol to provide, if need be, guidance and strategic direction on this issue. The results of the discussion this year could be a decision or may not result in a decision, could be a request to the TIAP to provide additional information regarding the speed and the scale of the transition that is taking place. Perhaps this could also be informed by information or submission from producing countries, parties that produce MDIs, on the current situation in their countries, including whether there are any plans for an MDI transitions, companies that are developing alternatives, timelines for regulatory approvals, the export markets that these countries have, so that others, importing countries such as ourselves, for instance, can get ourselves ready for a potential transition down the road. And all this can also be informed by lessons learned from the previous transition from CFC to HFC propellants in MDIs. Ultimately, whether there is in fact a need for some kind of strategic direction globally or domestically from the parties regarding the transition is something I think that is still up for discussion. Perhaps it is something that we need to wait a little bit longer in order for developments to happen. But I think at least this delegation is interested in having this discussion now, and possibly at this OEWG, if there was a group that was established to consider, among other things, the CRP from the European Union, we hope that it could at the same time consider these wider issues that could be associated with the transition. That said, we await the decision from the draft decision from the European Union to see, where precisely it may go in this area. However, in light of what we just said, generally we would prefer that at this stage the Montreal Protocol does not take an active role in promoting a specific approach to a transition until parties have had the opportunity to discuss the issues, potential risks and challenges in a thoughtful manner based on as much pertinent information as possible. But we would be in a position to look at encouraging parties to at least undertake some thought and some internal consultations between environmental and health agency to start discussing these issues. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. 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 Co-Chair.
So our proposal would be to keep this agenda item open, and once the CRP is ready to be presented, and then we will come back to this agenda item. So very quickly, I would like to turn to agenda item 8. We just have less than 10 minutes on future availability of heroines and their alternatives. And during OEWG45 and MOP35, a number of representatives expressed concerns about the information provided in the 2022 Coordinal Assessment Report and the 2022 Progress Report of the Fire Suppression Technical Committee of the TEEP on the long-term availability of heroines and the revisions to the predicted timelines for running out of heroines. Parties were of the view that those issues deserved careful consideration. Because of the time constraints at MOP 35, parties agreed to include the item on the agenda of this OEWG. And on this agenda item, we have received a CRP 5, and it is the unedited advanced version is posted on the meeting portal as well. So I would like to request one of the proponents to introduce this CRP. Canada?
of availability of halons and the sustainability of the recovered halons has been a topic of interest for a number of years. But due to the circumstances, as you mentioned, there's been limited time to discuss in depth over the last few years. We had reduced agenda during the COVID pandemic and a very packed agenda last year in Nairobi during the negotiations of the replenishment. We believe that this is an important topic, engaging by the number of questions that we heard this morning or this afternoon on the issue during the TEEP presentation. We think it is in front of mind of many parties. When looking at the progress report and the previous assessment report, quadrennial assessment report, we have noted many recurring elements in the information provided by the TEEP and the FS talk, which leads to considerable uncertainty with regards to longer-term availability of halons for enduring uses, and some new questions regarding potential sources of unknown emissions of halon 1301, which further increases uncertainty with regards to halon banks. In their progress report, the FS talk also knows of ongoing concerns regarding the apparent loss of institutional memory related to halon management and long-term needs for enduring uses, and the related consequences on stocks of recovered and recycled and reclaimed halons. Given the very specific and important issue of long-term halon availability, Canada believes that it is important for this body to maintain the accumulated knowledge gained by the parties over long term, following the phase-out of halons. We also noted some strong concerns from the FS talk on the destruction of halon banks as part of carbon credit programs. And we believe that this practice should be avoided unless the halon is too contaminated to be reused, or that it will never be needed for enduring uses in the future. Finally, there are questions with regards to linkages between feedstock use of halon 1301 and emissions of 1301, and we've heard quite a bit this morning and this afternoon with the presentation of the FS talk, which bring additional uncertainty with regards to long-term availability of halon for enduring uses. And with this in mind, Madam Co-Chair, Canada, and also joined with Australia and the US, we have proposed a draft decision, and we believe that there's an advanced copy that has been posted as CRP 5 on the portal. And I would like to take the opportunity to present the broad lines of the draft decisions, with aligns with many of the concerns raised by the FS talk. So maybe I can go over some of the more operative paragraphs. So the proposed decision would urge parties to refrain from any deliberate destruction of recovered and recycled halons unless they cannot be returned to an acceptable purity for subsequent reuse, and to retain recovered and recycled halon for anticipated future needs. It would also urge parties that restrict the import or export of recovered halon to review their regulations with a view to facilitate the transboundary movement of recovered halons for the purpose of recycling and reclamation. It would also urge parties to raise the awareness of the importance of sustainable management of halons, including avoiding the use of halons where other alternatives are available, and to inform their users, including the aviation and military, of the need to prepare for reduced access in the future. The proposed decision would also request the Ozone Secretariat to liaise with relevant international organizations about the importance of sustainable management of halons. It would also invite relevant parties to submit information on feedstock production, use, and if available, related emissions of halon 1301 to the Ozone Secretariat, which was a source of significant uncertainty, as we heard earlier today. And then to request the TEEP to report back on this information. So these are the broad lines of the proposed decision. So at this point, Madam Co-Chair, we would like to further discuss with interested parties to consider this draft decision. So perhaps we can leave it in your capable hands with regards to providing a suitable venue for further discussions. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
After the TEEP presentations, we also heard a lot of questions on this issue, and therefore proposal from the co-chairs that we establish a contact group on this. We are also very much behind the schedule. So for this reason as well, our proposal is to establish a contact group on this, if that is fine with the parties. I see no objection, so therefore we will establish a contact group, and the time and the room we will upload later. Thank you. For this contact group will be posted tomorrow. And with this, we would like to end today's plenary and see you, many of you, at the reception tonight. Thank you.
Well done, 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 well done,